Hello, it's Tyler Breeze here. I'm thrilled that you're here with me. You know, every subscription is super important to me because it helps our channel grow and bring more and better content for you. So if you like engaging stories and want to be part of our family, subscribe and hit the bell icon.
Woman traveling alone was humiliated by the airline, but they had no idea who she really was. The international airport was buzzing with activity. Announcements echoed through the terminals, passengers rushed with their luggage, and the chaos was relentless. Amid the frenzy, Emily Carter walked confidently toward her boarding gate. She wore a sharp business suit, heels that clicked against the polished floor, and carried a sleek carry-on bag that spoke volumes about her professionalism. Her flight to Paris was crucial. She had an important meeting the next day with key partners from her company. She had paid top dollar for her business class seat, seeking comfort and peace to prepare her presentation during the flight. But when she reached the boarding gate, something changed. A young flight attendant, with a rehearsed but hollow smile, stopped her before she could board the plane. "Miss Carter, could you please come with me for a moment?" he said, gesturing to a quiet corner near the boarding area. Emily frowned, puzzled. It wasn't common for someone to pull her aside before boarding, especially after she'd already passed all security checks. She followed the attendant, though her instincts warned her something wasn't right. "Is there a problem?" she asked, crossing her arms as she tried to stay calm. The attendant cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. "Well, ma'am, we've had a last-minute change in seat assignments. There's a first-class passenger who needs additional space in business class due to special circumstances. We were wondering if you'd be willing to switch your seat to the back of the plane." Emily blinked, incredulous. Was he joking? She had paid for premium service, not just a seat, but the entire experience promised by the airline. Plus, she was traveling alone. Why should she sacrifice her comfort for someone else? "Excuse me?" she replied, her tone sharp enough to make the attendant take a step back. "I bought my ticket for business class. I don't see why I should give up my seat." The man looked visibly uncomfortable, but adopted a firmer tone as if reciting a script. "We understand your situation, ma'am, but this is an exceptional case. I'm sure you'll understand that we need to prioritize the needs of all our passengers." Emily felt her blood boil. Prioritize the needs of all? That phrase sounded ridiculous, coming from someone clearly asking her to relinquish what she'd paid for just because it suited them. "No, I don't understand," she shot back, raising her voice slightly. "I'm also a passenger. I paid for this seat and I have no intention of moving." The attendant swallowed nervously, glancing around as if seeking support. Then another crew member appeared, a middle-aged woman in an impeccable uniform with a stern expression. "Miss Carter, I'm the head flight attendant. I understand your frustration, but unfortunately we can't guarantee your original seat. We're offering you a seat in economy with financial compensation. We hope you'll cooperate." Emily felt a mix of humiliation and anger bubbling inside her. The word cooperate rang in her ears like an affront. Were they trying to manipulate her? "Financial compensation," she repeated with a bitter laugh. "This isn't about money. It's about respect. You're asking me to give up something I already paid for because it's convenient for you. What happens if I refuse?" The head flight attendant exchanged a glance with the younger attendant before responding. "If you refuse, we'll have to evaluate the situation with our legal team. There could be consequences for future flights with our airline." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. Consequences? Were they threatening her? She could feel all eyes on her. Other passengers watched the scene unfold, some curious, others uncomfortable. No one said a word. It was as if everyone was waiting to see what this woman would do when faced with the authority of the airline. She took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. She knew any misstep could make things worse, but she also knew she couldn't. "Back down, not this time." "Fine," she said finally, with a calmness that surprised even herself. "I'll keep my seat, and if you have any issues with that, you can speak to my lawyers." The silence that followed was absolute. The head flight attendant looked furious but said nothing more. With a brusque gesture, she signaled that Emily could board the plane. Emily walked toward the gate with her head held high, but inside she felt a mix of humiliation and rage. She knew the battle was just beginning. Emily boarded the plane with fierce determination, but also with a knot in her stomach. Every step toward her seat seemed louder than usual. The eyes of other passengers followed her movements, some curious, others uncomfortable, as if they were witnessing a scene they'd rather avoid. When she reached her assigned seat in business class, she dropped her carry-on into the overhead compartment with more force than necessary. The thud drew nervous glances from nearby passengers. But Emily didn't apologize. She wasn't about to pretend everything was fine. The crew had already begun preparing for takeoff. However, Emily noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The flight attendants who had previously smiled politely now watched her with suspicion. It was clear that her refusal had caused tension among them, and it hung in the air like a dense cloud. When the plane finally took off, Emily tried to focus on her work. She pulled out her laptop and began reviewing documents for her meeting in Paris. But every time she looked up, she felt the heavy stares of the crew members. She tried to ignore it, but it was impossible not to notice how they avoided serving her drinks or snacks when passing by her row. Finally, one of them approached. Though his tone was anything but friendly. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" asked the same attendant who had confronted her at the gate, with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Water, please," Emily replied, keeping her tone neutral. The man placed the glass in front of her with such force that some of the liquid spilled onto the tray table. Emily locked eyes with him but said nothing. She knew any comment would only escalate the situation. Time seemed to drag as the plane cruised toward its destination. The discomfort inside the cabin was palpable. Emily could feel passengers exchanging glances, whispering comments under their breath. She could imagine what they were saying. "That woman is causing trouble. She should have just switched seats." But no one dared to intervene. No one wanted to get involved in a dispute that had clearly escalated beyond the norm. Then something unexpected happened. A young child seated a few rows ahead began to cry. His mother tried to calm him without success, and the crying turned into a loud wail that filled the cabin. The head flight attendant, who until that moment had been supervising from a distance, quickly moved to assist. But as she passed by Emily, she couldn't resist muttering under her breath. "Maybe if you'd cooperated, this wouldn't have happened," she said in a tone barely audible, but clear enough for Emily to hear. Those words were the last straw. Emily slammed her laptop shut and turned to face the woman, who pretended to be busy comforting the child. Her voice, though low, carried a sharp edge. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" Emily asked, locking her gaze on the head flight attendant. The woman stopped, visibly surprised that someone had heard her. For a moment, it seemed like she might deny it, but then she adopted a defiant expression. "Nothing important, Ms. Carter. I just hope you understand that your attitude has caused inconvenience to everyone here," she replied, her tone attempting professionalism but dripping with disdain. Emily felt her face flush with anger. She wanted to respond, but she knew any words at that moment would only fuel the conflict. Instead, she discreetly pulled out her phone, ensured it was in airplane mode, and opened the voice recorder app. With subtlety, she began capturing fragments of the interaction. She didn't know exactly what she'd do with it, but something inside told her she needed to document what was happening. The rest of the flight passed in tense silence. The crew continued to treat her with indifference, and the other passengers avoided looking at her directly. Emily, for her part, tried to stay occupied, but her mind kept circling back to what had just happened. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she faced a situation like this. As an independent and successful woman, she was used to dealing with men and women who tried to undermine her authority, but she had never experienced something so public and humiliating. When the plane finally landed in Paris, Emily was one of the first to stand up. She gathered her belongings quickly and headed toward the exit. But just before leaving the cabin, the head flight attendant intercepted her once more. "We hope you have a good day, Ms. Carter," she said with a smile that looked more like a grimace, "and perhaps reflect on your behavior during this flight." Emily stared at her without saying a word. Then, with her head held high, she stepped off the plane. As she walked through the terminal, she pulled out her phone and reviewed the recording she had made. The quality wasn't perfect, but the words were clear. She knew she had something powerful in her hands, something that could change the course of what she had just lived through. Charles de Gaulle Airport was as busy as ever. But Emily barely noticed the chaos around her. Her mind was occupied processing what had happened during the flight and planning her next move. While waiting for her luggage at the carousel, she opened her phone and reviewed the recording she had made. The words of the head flight attendant rang out clearly. "Maybe if you'd cooperated, this wouldn't have happened." That phrase, delivered with a tone dripping in disdain, was enough to prove how the crew had tried to manipulate her. Emily knew she had two options: stay silent and let the incident fade into oblivion, or expose what had happened and risk facing the consequences. But Emily Carter wasn't a woman who stayed quiet when something felt unjust. After years of working in a male-dominated industry, she had learned that silence only fueled more abuses of power. She decided to act. Back at her hotel, Emily uploaded the audio file to her laptop and carefully edited it. She removed background noise and isolated the most relevant parts of the conversation. Then, she wrote a detailed thread on her Twitter account, explaining everything that had happened from the moment she arrived at the airport to disembarking in Paris. She attached the audio clip and included photos of her business class ticket as proof. She ended the thread with a pointed question. "Is this really how airlines are supposed to treat us? Where's the respect for customers?" She posted the thread in the late afternoon, expecting maybe a few replies from her usual followers, a modest group of colleagues and close friends. But what happened next far exceeded her expectations. Within an hour, the thread began to go viral. People from all over the world shared her story, expressing outrage at how she had been treated. Some users recounted similar experiences with the same airline, while others criticized the crew's intimidating behavior. The hashtag #JusticeForEmily quickly trended on social media, and local news outlets began reaching out for interviews. That night, as she scrolled through the comments, on her phone, Emily felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was surprised by the magnitude of the response. She never imagined her story would resonate so deeply with others. But on the other hand, she felt a profound sadness realizing how many women had gone through similar situations without daring to speak up. There were messages from women saying things like, "This happened to me months ago, but I didn't say anything because I thought it was my fault," or "Thank you for speaking up for all of us." The next morning, Emily woke up to a flood of notifications. Major newspapers and TV programs across the country had picked up her story. A journalist called to inform her that they were even investigating other complaints against the airline, including cases of discrimination and mistreatment of frequent flyers. Emily agreed to give a live television interview, knowing this was the perfect moment to take the case to the next level. During the interview, broadcast live, Emily spoke, calmly but firmly. She explained how the crew had pressured her to give up her seat, how they had treated her condescendingly, and how they had tried to intimidate her with veiled threats. She also shared the audio recording, ensuring it was accessible to all viewers. "It's not just about me," Emily said directly into the camera. "This is about how we treat people, especially women, when they assert their rights. We can't allow companies to use their power to intimidate us or make us feel inferior. If we don't speak up now, these behaviors will continue to happen." Emily's words struck a deep chord with the audience. Thousands of people began sharing the interview, and the movement on social media grew even stronger. The airline's stock prices began to plummet, and loyal customers announced they would stop flying with them. It was clear the company had underestimated the impact one determined person could have in fighting for justice. But the uprising didn't end there. The day after the interview, Emily received an unexpected email. It was from an international organization dedicated to defending consumer rights. They offered her legal support to file a class action lawsuit against the airline, citing her case as a clear example of corporate abuse of power. Emily accepted the offer without hesitation. She knew this was no longer just about her. It was about sending a clear message that no one, not even a large corporation, could trample on people's rights without facing consequences. The pressure on the airline grew exponentially in the days that followed. Social media remained a battleground where thousands of people openly criticized the company's practices. Hashtags like "Respect passengers" and "No to airline abuse" trended in multiple countries, amplifying Emily's message. But it wasn't just public opinion that shook the company. legal consequences began to pile up as well. The International Consumer Rights Organization filed a formal class action lawsuit against the airline, citing not only Emily's case, but also other testimonies from passengers who had suffered similar treatment. The accusation was damning: systemic discrimination, abuse of power, and lack of respect for customers. Additionally, several aviation regulators began investigating the company's internal policies, particularly those related to how passengers were treated during conflicts. Meanwhile, Emily became the face of this fight. Her image appeared on magazine covers, TV programs, and online debates. She was invited to conferences and events to speak about female leadership, consumer rights, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Many saw her as a modern-day hero, a brave woman who had taken on a corporate giant without backing down an inch. However, it wasn't all applause and recognition. There were also attempts to discredit her. Some social media users questioned her motives, suggesting she was seeking publicity or personal revenge. Even a few columnists wrote articles defending the airline, arguing that Emily had been difficult and that her refusal to cooperate had caused the problem. But these criticisms only strengthened her resolve. Instead of retreating, Emily responded with even more force. "I'm not looking to be a victim," she declared in an interview. "I just want companies to understand that customers aren't numbers. We're people with rights, and if we're not treated with respect, we need to demand it. If that makes me someone difficult, then I'll proudly wear that title." In the meantime, the airline tried to contain the damage. They issued a public statement apologizing for the misunderstanding and assured the public they were reviewing their internal procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. However, many interpreted this gesture as a superficial maneuver to calm the waters. Consumers no longer trusted their words. The tipping point came when a former employee of the airline decided to break their silence. In an exclusive interview, they revealed that for years there had been a culture of prioritizing VIP passengers at any cost. According to them, crew members received implicit instructions to cater to first-class passengers, even if it meant mistreating others. This testimony confirmed what many had suspected. The behavior toward Emily wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a systemic practice. With each new revelation, the airline's reputation deteriorated further. Several celebrities and public figures announced they would stop using their services, and some companies cancelled their corporate travel contracts. The airline's revenue plummeted dramatically, and its market value hit historic lows. But the most shocking development came weeks later, when the airline's board of directors made an unexpected decision. They announced the dismissal of the CEO and promised to implement a series of reforms to improve passenger treatment. They also offered financial compensation to all those affected by similar cases to Emily's, including a personalized apology letter signed by the new leadership. Emily received her letter while attending a work meeting in Paris. When she opened it, she found a brief but sincere message. "Dear Ms. Carter, we want to express our deepest apologies for the treatment you received on board our flight. We recognize that we failed to meet our service standards and are committed to changing our culture to ensure this never happens again. We hope you will accept our offer of compensation as a gesture of goodwill." While many expected Emily to react with satisfaction or triumph, her response was surprisingly reflective. "I didn't do this for money or an apology," she said in a subsequent press conference. "I did it because I believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. If this situation helps other people feel empowered to report injustices, then it will have been worth it." Emily Carter's case didn't just transform the airline. It left a lasting mark on society. Months after the incident, when the headlines had faded and the scandal began to recede, her story was still remembered as an example of how one person can make a difference. But what was most surprising was how this event sparked broader changes in the airline industry and beyond. The airline, forced by legal pressures and public scrutiny, implemented unprecedented internal reforms. They created an independent committee tasked with overseeing customer service practices and ensuring all passengers were treated equally and with respect. They also launched a training program for their staff, focused on combating bias and promoting a culture of empathy. To everyone's surprise, these measures not only improved the public perception of the company, but also increased customer satisfaction. But the impact didn't stop with that airline. Other carriers began reviewing their own policies, fearing they might face similar situations if they didn't act preventively. International regulatory agencies took notice and tightened regulations regarding passenger treatment. For the first time in years, there was tangible change in how airlines interacted with their customers. Emily, for her part, continued to be an influential voice on issues of social justice and consumer rights. Her experience had given her a unique platform to address larger problems. She began collaborating with organizations fighting discrimination and abuse of power, especially in environments where women were vulnerable. She was invited to speak at universities, business conferences, and government events, sharing her story and inspiring others to stand up for their rights. This wasn't just a conflict between a passenger and an airline, she said during one of her talks. It was a reflection of something much bigger, the daily struggle many women face to be heard and respected. If my story teaches you anything, I hope it's that you should never let anyone make you feel less valuable than you are. One of the most significant initiatives Emily led was the creation of a foundation dedicated to supporting women who faced abuse in workplace or public settings. The foundation offered free legal advice, empowerment workshops, and educational resources to help victims report injustices without fear of retaliation. In no time, it became a beacon of hope for hundreds of women who, until then, had remained silent. What stood out most about Emily, however, was her humility. Despite achieving celebrity status, she remained the same determined and hard-working woman she had always been. Instead of seeking the spotlight, she used her influence to give a voice to those who didn't have one. During an interview, when asked how it felt to be considered a symbol of resistance, she responded simply, "I'm no hero. I'm just someone who decided not to stay silent." What's truly important is that each of us has the power to do the same. You don't need to be famous or have unlimited resources to create change. You just need to be willing to stand up and say, "This isn't right." Over time, Emily returned to her everyday life, though it was never quite the same. Now, when she traveled by plane, airline employees recognized her and greeted her with respect, but she insisted on being treated like any other passenger. She didn't seek privileges or special treatment. She simply wanted fairness for everyone. One day, while waiting for her flight at an airport, a young woman approached her timidly. She looked to be in her mid-20s, carrying a small suitcase and wearing a nervous expression. "Excuse me, are you Emily Carter?" the young woman asked, almost in a whisper. Emily smiled and nodded. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" The young woman hesitated for a moment before responding. "I just wanted to tell you that your story inspired me. A few weeks ago, I faced a similar situation on a train. An employee tried to make me switch seats because a man insisted on taking mine. At first, I thought about giving in, but then I remembered what you said in one of your interviews, that we deserve respect. So I stood my ground, and it worked. Thank you for that." Emily felt a lump in her throat. Moments like this were the true reward for everything she had gone through. It wasn't about headlines or public recognition. It was about knowing that her fight had touched lives and given others the courage to stand up for themselves. As the plane took off toward its next destination, Emily looked out the window. The sky was clear and the sun shone brightly. She thought about everything that had happened since that fateful day at the airport. She had faced humiliation, threats, and criticism. But she had also found purpose and connection. She knew there was still much work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the world was changing little by little in the right direction. And so, as the plane soared through the clouds, Emily smiled. She knew her story wasn't ending here. It was just the beginning of something much bigger.
I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. If it touched your heart, please leave a like to show your support. It means a lot to me and helps bring our story to more people who might need to hear it today.